everyone. Welcome to the PointMan Utilities Podcast. My name is Chad Smeltzer. I'm your host. Today, we have CEO Paige Tucker here to talk about his life and how he got started in the industry. Thanks for joining me, Paige.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Paige, you've been in the industry for a decent amount of time. It looks like your background was in car sales, things like that, or dealerships. I did a little background on you, but what I wanted to do today was get to the audience to know a little bit more about you personally, like where you grew up and where you kind of started your journey.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm actually from Canada. I grew up in northern British Columbia, and my dad was involved in the pipeline construction industry. That's where I became somewhat familiar with some of the issues that's facing the utility and pipeline industry based on a lack of good location data, which would cause serious issues on some of these pipeline construction projects. I mean, you hit a major pipeline that you weren't aware that it was even there, causes some serious issues, downtime, cost. I mean, I don't have to get into it all of it, but let's just say that it causes some serious problems.
So your dad was involved. Did he work for you? You mentioned, did he work for a construction company like in his past?
He's actually an engineer, and then eventually started his own pipeline construction company. So he would be one of the contractors that would take on the responsibility of actually installing the pipeline in the ground.
Oh, wow. Okay. So how long did he do that for?
Oh, I think he did that for about 20 years. And then eventually from there, he got involved in real estate investment and became, a fairly successful large contractor as far as building, homes and commercial developments in the United States.
So you grew up in the construction world from the get-go.
Yeah, it's actually true. I never really thought about that, actually. When you think about pipeline industry and then eventually even, my dad, evolving into, construction of homes and large commercial properties, it still involves trying to identify where utilities and pipelines are located, because if you have wrong information, then again, it causes some serious issues.
How often were you on the job with him? Do you remember some of those times?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'd go out on the projects with them when I was, even 11, 12 years old. And then I ended up going to a private school, and in the summer and in winter, I would also work on those pipeline projects to earn a little extra money, as well as when I was in college. So, I was fairly familiar with the projects. I never got to the point where I was like a foreman or operating heavy equipment. I was more along the lines of running around doing errands. I was like a welder's helper and, things of that nature. But, I was right out on the project, and, I got to see all the internal operations and, a lot of the things that, affected the operations and workflows and the business practices.
Wow, that's a lot to just to be involved in that at a young age and learning all the ropes from the ground up, so to speak. Being a laborer, just sweeping the floors at a construction site, that kind of stuff. I remember being around that too, so I can kind of relate, what that was like.
Well, actually, one of the things that I learned was, some of these projects we'd work outside. It'd be 40, 50 below. So one of the greatest lessons I learned was, this is not what I want to be doing. There's got to be a better way to make a decent living. So, I hand it to my dad, but man, those pipeliners work in rugged conditions.
Yeah. Speaking of that, think about that today, like, with the labor shortages we have, it's hard to find anyone that wants to do that type of work and really, get dirty, so to speak, or cold, or, those kind of things. Everybody's kind of become comfortable. What do you think about the labor markets these days compared to back when you were a kid?
Well, when I grew up, I think things were, a lot different. I mean, people, number one, they wanted to work, and they wanted to be proud of the job they had and how many hours they were putting in, and the fact that, they were taking care of, their family, and they had, a little extra money that they could, take vacations and, buy nice trucks and cars. And I don't know, it almost seems today, because, I'm an entrepreneur, I run a company, and we're actually trying to, hire people right now. And it's really hard to find people with what I would consider to be just a standard good work ethic. Everybody wants to work part-time and work from home, but they still want to, enjoy the benefits of being paid well. And, those don't necessarily correlate. I mean, usually the harder you work and the longer you work, the more you get paid. So, I struggle with that a little bit, but the world changes, right? And, I'm getting up there a little bit in age, and maybe it's just it's it's a different type of culture. But we're fortunate. We still have good people that work for us with a really good work ethic. But I think it affects all the businesses. Trying to find people that really want to dig their heels in and work hard and work their way up in the organization. So, but there's still some really good people out there. There's no doubt about it.
There is, that's for sure. It's just about finding.
It's a needle in a haystack. Yeah, it's not as easy as it used to be. I mean, we put out for people to come work for us in various positions, and we get a lot of resumes in, and some cases I'm told that people even just put resumes in so they can continue to draw an employment, which it's kind of sad.
That is sad. That's really sad. That's no ambition, no drive. It's not good for any companies, trying to grow and scale. That's for sure. It makes it real difficult. So going back to your, just being on a construction site and being with your dad, and I assume your family was all involved, kind of your mom and things like that. Was that kind of the way your life was all construction?
I kind of grew up old school. Mom stayed home and took care of the kids, and all my brothers were also involved in the oil and gas industry. I have two older brothers, and both of them were involved in the industry. You kind of follow after your dad's footsteps, and he set a very good example. But like I said, working outside a couple of times when it was 60 below or 95 degrees above, as we call it in Canada, then it was like, this is uncomfortable, let's put it that way.
Right. So you had two older brothers, is that correct?
Yes.
Then you were the youngest or middle? Like, how'd that work?
I'm the youngest. Yeah, I'm the youngest of three.
You're the youngest. Got it. Interesting. Yeah. So okay. So I would imagine there's a lot of sibling, like you guys were. How did that work with your brothers? Did they like make you do the crappy jobs and they were doing some of the easier jobs? Like I'm just wondering how that played out.
As I mentioned, I kind of grew up in a little bit of an old school world. So by the time my brothers were, teenagers, I mean, they were working out in the oil field industry.
Okay.
I mean, they were basically, grown men with grown men responsibilities. I was kind of a lagger, if you will. And so I asked my dad. I grew up in a really small town, and I asked my dad if I could go to private school, which was about 800 miles away. It was actually on the coast of British Columbia on Vancouver Island. And so I went to school there. And, in the summers, I would still go home and work. But I was fortunate enough to kind of be exposed to completely different environment, people from, all over the world that I went to school with that are still, friends of mine today. And then for college, I decided to go to the United States for college. And that's where I was exposed to, all different types of opportunities. And as you mentioned, one of my first jobs was in the automotive industry. And I got to the point where I was managing dealerships, and I was asking for information that wasn't available to me. And I'm like, well, with good data, you can make some pretty good business decisions instead of just scrambling around and, throwing darts up on the wall. So inside the mainframe computers in the dealership that had all the service records and the sales records and the contact records, I wanted to get that information out of there so that I could identify, who were our service customers and who were our sales customers, and then cross-reference that with other data lists so I could determine, who were our prospective customers. And they said, you can't get that information out of those computers. They're basically old green screen mainframes. And I said, when someone tells me it can't be done, that's kind of like an indication, well, we better figure it out, because there probably is a formula. It probably can be done. But telling me you can't do something probably goes back to when I was a brat, right? And it was like, as soon as you say you can't do that, I'm like, well, I got to buck the system. But needless to say, I figured out a way how to be able to extract that information out of those computers and then generate, data reports and data analysis and cross-reference it with, other lists that were available, which today is, standard operation. Back then that was considered to be somewhat, novel. And then I started my own company. That's when my kind of entrepreneurial endeavor and journey began. I started my own company, which was based on going into these dealerships, extrapolating the information out of their systems, generating reports, and then doing mailing those customers. And my mailing response was significantly higher than what the national response was. Well, that was because I was I call it almost cheating, right? I mean, I was taking records right out of their system as opposed to just, buying lists. And then one day I was in a company's office that I had contracted to do some software development for me. And I got there a little early and asked, what was he doing? And he said he was mapping out customers to determine where to build Mighty Key muffler service centers. And I mean, it's kind of a joke when I said, "Oh my God, I don't think you realize what you just showed me." And he goes, "Yeah, I just showed you where I'm actually mapping out customers so that I can identify where to put Mighty Key muffler, service centers." And it's, I have a contract with Mighty Key. And I go, "Where are you getting the information from?" And he said, "From the Department of Motor Vehicles." So I'm like, oh my God, like just the light bulb went off. And at the time, I didn't, I was thinking mapping. The terminology today is GIS, Geographic Information Systems. So it was my first kind of introduction to GIS. So then what I did was I would take the customers, download them from the dealership's computer systems, their service customers, their sales customers, and then I'd map them out using GIS systems so I could see geographically where they were located. Then I would use the 80-20 principle and I would prioritize the zip codes of where they got the most business from, either for service or for sales. I could show that to the dealership, and then I could download the DMV records and cross-reference them and say, here's where your customers come from, what zip codes, how many you have in each zip code. And by the way, here's how many customers there are that are driving the exact same vehicles that you're selling that have never been into your dealership for sales and service. And that's probably where you want to focus most of your marketing dollars. And based on the responses that I'm getting, I can provide significant ROI.
Yeah.
And I was in that business for a long time, did really well. I got to the point where I formed another company with a group of partners. I eventually exited that company. And my dad had moved to a small town in Colorado, which I'm currently headquartered, which is Grand Junction, Colorado.
Nice.
And I thought, I'm going to start another business. I still have the entrepreneurial spirit, and I'll do it where my dad lives so I can spend, quality time with him. He passed away a couple of years ago, but that's why I moved here. So that worked out very well. And the goal is that, okay, I have this experience in identifying assets, if you will, using geographical information systems to provide better data so that you can make more informed and intelligent business decisions on, either managing those assets or increasing those assets. And so I also know that there's a major, major issue in the utility and pipeline industry, kind of like customers where, they don't really know where the customers are because they're not using technology to its fullest advantage. In this, they don't know where the utilities and pipelines are.
Before you jump into that page, I want to go back a little bit before we get in it, because I know we're going to get deep into the utility space, but I want to understand a little bit more when you're talking about the mainframe and technology. How did you learn that? Did you go to school for that? Like, where did that come from? That just you picked it up just random?
I basically said that, okay, it's basically a problem, right? And it comes down to solving a problem. I've got information that's available, and it's available somewhere. It's like behind the hidden wall, okay? And people are saying that, well, you can't penetrate that wall. And I think, well, what if I could figure out a way to do it, right? And then you just figure out a way to do it. And I'll give you an example. And usually, what's interesting?
Yeah.
Usually there's all these complex formulas on how to try and address like a serious problem. But if you break it down to the simplicity, there's usually a really, really simple, easy formula. So you would think that I had to design some type of software that would integrate into those mainframe computers so that I could pull the information out. And I sat down one day with someone and said, I'm trying to figure this out. And they said, well, what if we basically literally put a mirror on front of the computer and then ran all the reports, and that the mirror copied it onto another system. So we actually weren't doing any type of integration or hardwire into those business systems. We would just mirror everything that's running and we would copy that.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's brilliant. Well, if you think about it, that's pretty simple, right?
Right.
But it worked. It worked really well. And, as we get deeper into our discussions, either today or in another session, the way that we have solved how to try and identify where utilities and pipelines are located, I always tell everybody, like, this actually isn't rocket science, but you just have to become really good at doing it. And then you have to be, at the end of the day, and you have to be able to trust the data, right? And actually, the less steps that are involved in it actually makes it even easier and decreases the probability of error.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm amazed at the ability for you to problem solve. First of all, it's not everybody can do that kind of stuff. Just automatically snap and start matching up data sets and putting them on, I would assume, Excel spreadsheets, pivot tables. Like, you had to put that in some kind of format, right?
Yeah. Well, I think we're all good at something, and we're all really good at something. We just have to, find out what that is. I mean, I wish I could be a receiver in the NFL or a quarterback, but the fact of the matter is that's not going to happen. I sometimes am amazed at the work that even like that accountants can do, right? I mean, I'm good at numbers, but I can't sit there all day and work with numbers and formulas. But yeah, I think one of the things I can do, and I also help, other people out with it, is they might have some type of a complex issue or a problem. And I have the tendency to break it down, first of all, to where you can look at it from a different point of view. And normally you can find that there's actually a simple solution. The solution might be complex, but it's still simplistic in nature. And I think that's kind of what I do. That's my wheelhouse. Sometimes people bring me problems. These are really smart people, and I just break it down sometimes to where why don't we just do this? And they're like, well, that's a simple way. And I say, well, I'm a simple guy. I actually can't look at it at the complexity that you can. So I'm not going to take credit that I'm some super intelligent, smart guy or something. I have to break it down to where it's really simple, or I can't even look at it. Like, you know what I mean? I can't digest it. So I think that's part of it, is taking complex problems and breaking them down and see if you can find a simple solution. And in that case, maybe utilizing, existing components that are readily available, that maybe not one or two will solve the problem, but when you combine several of those components, then you can come up with the solution.
Now, you didn't go to college. I didn't hear you mention college at all, anything like that. Did I miss something there?
I did. I just wasn't very good at it.
Okay.
I went to Arizona State. I was recruited to Arizona State to play rugby. The private school I went to in Canada is the number one rugby school in Canada. So I went to Arizona State. At the time, the Pac-10 was trying to, get rugby going, and they recruited rugby players literally from all over the world. So I went to Arizona State. I went there for a couple of years, and then I got exposed to football, and I'm like, wow, I really like this game of, football. I grew up playing ice hockey, wasn't really around football much, and decided that I wanted to try football. So I went to junior college in San Diego, Palomar Junior College, played there for a couple of years, and then was recruited to go up to San Francisco State. And I played there for 2 years. I have my associate's degree in business administration. I never got to the point where I got a degree. I was probably about a year, away. But I was in San Francisco at the time, and of course, it's the Silicon Valley. It's the .com era. And I went to work for a dealership, ended up managing the dealership. And that's where I was, as I mentioned, exposed to there was an issue. And I'm like, with all of these technologists, software developers, that are in the Silicon Valley, there's probably a way that we can solve this. And I saw a business opportunity, and, like any entrepreneur, I went for it.
Now we have like 8 minutes left, but what was that entrepreneur, that first business you had? What was that like? Even though you probably had the connections with the dealerships and things like that, and you built this solution to the problem, right? What was that like when you started the business and separated yourself from the dealership?
Well, number one, you're taking a leap of faith because you got a pretty good paycheck, coming in, and I'm literally driving any car I want to drive, any day. I could take it back from the dealership. So it's like anything being an entrepreneur. I mean, you're leaving a certain level of security, but it comes down to that risk and reward. And I remember the first time that we were able to extrapolate the data out of the system, run the reports, and then I took that to a dealer that I had been working with that I knew, because as dealers, you talk amongst each other. And I showed him what we were doing and asked them if they would be, willing to buy my services from me. And when he said, yeah, let's do it, I kind of laughed. I mean, I didn't even have a business bank account. I had to trust me. You have to write the check to me, and I'm going to go cash it so I can start, a business account. But yeah, it's exhilarating, and the first time you sell one, you're like, why can't I duplicate this and, do this maybe, 1,000 more times, and imagine what that would look like if you could do that, right? So it's a small win. Yeah, but the first small win is actually maybe the most monumental and the biggest win, because it gives you the encouragement that, I can do this.
No, you're spot on. And then I'm curious on, like, after that first big win, which is exhilarating, like you said, then you had to be thinking, what's the next steps? Because you had business experience from your dad, which is great, right? So you kind of understood how business works. Did you decide to start getting more dealerships and then building, hiring people? What was that process kind of like?
Yeah, that's exactly what the process is. I had to start hiring people to work with me, to help me with the workload. And then I went and sold more dealerships, and it started to grow. And then we really started to get a reputation, not just in the Bay Area, but throughout California, and then throughout other states, and then even nationally. I mean, it grew, and it grew quick. I mean, the average response on direct mail is less than 1%. And, we were getting between 30 to 40% responses, which was, unheard of. And then I got to the point where our solution was endorsed by the automotive manufacturers, and so it even became easier to sell because it gave you the credibility. And it's no different for any business, even in the business we're in, right now. We're starting to get to that point where, it starts out with the first one, and there's always, I would say, a few hurdles that you have to overcome, a few bugs that you have to work out. And then you get another one and another one and another one. And then, eventually you start getting national recognition, and you start to get credibility and endorsements from other organizations and other associations. And that even makes it easier. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, it's all about surrounding yourself with really good people that are really good at a particular discipline. Because, like I said, I can start a company and I can solve a problem. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, I do everything and I do everything well, because that's not the fact. And, I surround myself with really good people that are much better at what they do than I could ever possibly, wish to be. And I think that's important also, as being an entrepreneur and a leader, is don't be afraid to hire people that are a lot smarter than you.
That is so true. And I would imagine there had to be challenges though and struggles somewhere in between there, that you either hired maybe the wrong person, or, was there any struggles in that first business that you had to overcome?
Yeah, because I had partners as well, right? And anytime you have, partners, it's a melting pot. It's different personalities, different ambitions, different work ethic, even psychologically. I mean, that whole dynamic changes. But that's in order to grow a business, you can't do it yourself. So you're going to have to work with, various other people, and how to manage them and how to communicate. And it works both ways as well. So yeah, I mean, there's difficulties and trials and tribulations associated to building a company. And as you mentioned, some of that is even making sure that you select, the right people. And when you realize that you didn't select the right person, I mean, you have to take action right away, because you're only hurting yourself, you're hurting the other person, and ultimately, you're hurting the business. And my dad always had a golden rule. He said, you take care of the business and the business will take care of you. And that's probably, rule number one. And sometimes that's making hard decisions, accepting and acknowledging that you hired the wrong person, and, let that person go. Because if you don't, it affects, the other person as well. It's not good for them either.
Yeah. I see that happen a lot in businesses. They don't want to make that emotional decision to detach them from someone that's not performing the way they should, right? Or, you got to get that right person on the seat on the bus, right? That's the ultimate goal. And if you can't pivot and make those critical decisions, you stifle your growth as a company. I mean, that's where it all goes after that. It's like, now we're at 10 million, we got to get to 15. Yeah, exactly. So, well, this is really enlightening, just learning more about you, Paige, and your life. And thank you for giving us a glimpse into your life and what that's like. And I think you have a son now and a daughter.
I have two sons. I have two sons, actually. Yeah, I got two boys, and someone said, they always say the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Then I've got my work cut out for me.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I have a funny suspicion they'll have the same entrepreneurial spirit, which means, when I tell them you can't do something, then they're going to try and buck the system. So I'll just have to accept that that's the nature of coming from me, and I'll just have to deal with it. So I'll do it with a smile on my.
Yeah.
Probably the same thing my dad had to put up with, right?
Oh yeah, it sounds like it. You're going to be dealing with the same stuff. That's it's got to be fun to watch though. As they're moving into their life and creating their own future, and you're just there to guide, and nurture that relationship and keep it going. That's the key.
No, no, and you know what? And I think this is for any parent. Is I try and I always use the analogy, stop them from putting their hand on the hot oven, right? I mean, you try and teach them things that they shouldn't be doing, and hopefully they listen. But we all know that sometimes you just have to learn, learn the hard way, and sometimes maybe you can mitigate those risks. But I know my dad did the same thing, right? I mean, he tried to instill in me the things that I should or shouldn't be doing, good business principles, moral ethic. But, it's life we have to go through. And sometimes we have to make our own mistakes. And we're all a little different. The one person might learn one time not to do something. And some of us are a little bit more hard-headed, and it takes us a few times. And, I'm getting up there in age, but I'm still learning what to do and what not to do, right? And probably a few things I've done that I'm like, darn, I shouldn't have done that again. And I'll probably do it a few more times, but that's life.
That's his life. And if we're not learning, we're not growing, right? That's the key. So
every day, every single day.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for this first episode on the PointMan Utilities Podcast. This is a great start to our podcasting journey there, Paige, and I look forward to the next one.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, and Happy New Year. I'm looking forward to a great 2024.